Hi, so this lesson is basically an overview of everything you'll need to cover if you're doing your Preliminary Grade Acoustic Exam. That's the RGT, Registry of Guitar Tutors Preliminary Grade Acoustic Exam. So it's the exam that is pre-grade 1. There is an exam in the acoustic range before preliminary, which is initial. That's usually really aimed at younger players, like maybe younger children. So for the most part, preliminary grade is seen to be the first level. If you're studying your preliminary grade exam, you're probably a beginner, although you could be somebody who's been playing a while and has decided to do grades, and for whatever reason you want to go back right to the start. There's often a good reason for that. You want to fill in gaps in your knowledge and so on and so on. But essentially, most people doing this exam are beginners. If you're not, that's fine. But for the most part, I'll probably refer to certain things as if you are. So, you know. And one of those essential things I really want to point out that you should be aware of by now, or you should make sure you're aware of as you go to begin learning the guitar, is that amongst other things, you know the names of the open strings. From the thickest string through to the thinnest string, or as we say, from the lowest, because it's lowest in pitch, through to the highest, because it's highest in pitch. The notes are E, A, D, G, B, and E. And I use elephants and donkeys grow big ears as a way of, how I initially learn the names of the notes myself, the open strings, and how I teach people to remember it. There's other versions out there, but that works for me. This is really useful because you've got a direct reference point. Instead of saying, for example, string 1, which actually universally the first string, the thinnest string is referred to, it's just easier if we can call this low E, high E, and obviously all the notes in between. So make sure you know those notes. In your preliminary grade acoustic exam, you've got to memorise certain concepts. You need to memorise 2 scales and you need to memorise 6 chords. They're all in the book. You should have the book if you're studying for this grade. So you need to memorise the chords, you need to memorise the scales, you need to be able to play 1 rhythm study from the book. There's 3 in the book. You need to be able to, that's not from memory, you can look at the book for that section. And also you need to be able to play 2 melodies. In other words, tunes, which are also in the book. There's 4 melodies in the book and you need to be able to play 2 of them. Again, not from memory, you can actually look at the book during the exam. And then there's also a listening test towards the end, the Aural assessment, where you'll be listening to different things like pitch. Notes will be played high and low and so on, and you have to recognise which is the highest and this kind of thing. But I'll come to that properly later. So, okay, scales. They're in the book. The tabs are in the book. An important thing is to know which scale you're actually playing. Of course, you've got to memorise the C major scale, which is this one. Okay, but in an exam, when you learn a scale, you're expected to play ascending and descending, in other words, going up and going down, and you generally would not play the highest note twice. So C major scale should be played like this. So the point isn't about speed, it's about fluency and evenness of tone, evenness of rhythm and clarity, okay? The G major scale, same principle, goes like this. Okay. A lot of people struggle early on to remember which is the C major scale, which is the G major scale, and the easiest tip I would give you is that out of the 2 scales, the G major scale begins on the string that is named G. So this string is the G string, whereas the C major scale begins on the A string, although at fret 3 where it begins, it is a C. But it's really simple to just say, well, okay, the G scale begins on the string that is named G, it's open G. So if you use that as a way to memorise it, then okay, you go and memorise the scales and you know which one's which always, then you know you've got your scales memorised adequately for your grade. The chords, there are 6 chords you need to memorise. You've got C major, G major, D major, and you've got A minor, D minor, and E minor. The chord boxes are in the book. The chords sound like this: C major. In fact, let me try and do this in order as they come in the book. I think it would be G major first, then C major, then we've got D major. We have A minor. We have D minor. And we've got finally E minor. Okay, all of those scales need to be memorized. You need to know which one's which. You've got 3 major chords, you've got 3 minor chords. A lot of people get confused at this grade between D major and D minor because it's the only key in this grade where we have 2 types of chords. You know, we've got everything else is like we've got G major, we don't have G minor, and so on. We have A minor, but we don't have A major. So just make sure you know the difference between the symbols for the major and minor. Major chords are the only chords that should really be referred to by just their letter name. So technically speaking, if somebody says G, then you should really mean G major, and it's the same chord. If somebody says D, then they would really mean D major. And so D minor is D minor. So if somebody says play D or D major, you're looking at the one that in the book just says D. And if somebody says play D minor, you're looking at the one that says D small m. Okay? Maybe sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but this is throughout teaching this for years. You know, this is a common mistake or element of confusion that crops up. That's it. The emphasis is to make sure that you can play the notes clear, and that you only hit the desired amount of strings. Okay, why some strings, for example, some chords have 6 strings like G major, whereas D major only plays 4 strings. And you'll find that different chords have a different amount of strings played. The reason that there are specific notes is that usually when you play chords, you're trying to make the lowest note played be the root note. So just to summarize, if you play a C major chord, it contains 3 different notes. You don't really need to worry too much about memorizing those now, but it does. It contains the notes of C, E, and G. And on a guitar, some of those notes are repeated. Here's a C, here's an E, here's a G, here's a C repeated at a higher pitch, and also an E. So there's 3 different types of notes, but it's desirable, or more to the point, it's usual, it's the done thing to put the C, which is the root note of a C major chord or of any C type chord, at the bottom of the chord. So for example, if I was to play 6 strings when I played when I played a C, I'd be including a low E. Now, although there is an E in the chord of C, we don't want it to be the lowest note. We want C, the note of C, to be the lowest note we play in the chord of C. Okay? So you have to watch for those things. Make sure you hit the right amount of strings. Make sure you've got clarity within your notes. At first, you're going to find a lot of clunky notes. You're going to find some of your fingers aren't pressing on enough. You might find that you hit a chord and get this kind of result. You know, it's really normal to get that at first. You've got to put considerable amount of pressure on with your left hand, and also you having to position your fingers in that just so position so that you don't catch. For example, you know, finger 3 shouldn't be catching the D string and clipping it off and stopping the note from sounding out. Just you have to watch those kind of elements. So when you're learning your preliminary grade chords, they're possibly going to be the trickiest. That preliminary grade could be the most problematic time that you approach your chords, because it's the first time you're doing these full big chord shapes in comparison to some of the smaller ones that are at initial grade. And yeah, you can find that it's tricky, but as you go on, you'll probably find that grade 1, grade 2 begin to feel like just variations of what you're already now used to. Okay, so don't expect, or more to the point, don't worry if you feel it's quite tricky. It could take weeks, months to get these neat. But memorize the shapes as soon as you can. You know, as soon as you've got your book, memorize the shapes so you can begin to bring them up to scratch, basically. Okay, so that's the scales and chords covered. So then you come to your rhythm study. Rhythm studies, you need to be able to play one of the three, but I would recommend to everybody learn all three. The more things you can play, the better. You go into an exam and you have to play one rhythm study, but if you've practiced three, then you're going to be you're going to be that much better at playing rhythm studies. So it just makes sense to play as much as you can. You've got time signatures to consider. Everything's in the book. Essentially, when you play rhythms, regardless of which one you choose, and I'm just going to give you an example of rhythm study number 1 from that book. The emphasis is on clarity and evenness of rhythm. You're trying to keep the beat going. So, for example, the first 2 chords in rhythm study 1 sound basically play like this: 4 strums each of G, then E minor. Okay, what you don't want to do is this. You know, and have a broken rhythm. You're trying to aim for evenness, okay? So rhythm study 1 should sound like this. To save time, and finally it would land on a G again, which will just do 1 strum, but all this is in the book. Whichever rhythm study you go to play, the evenness of the rhythm and the clarity of the chords is the most important thing. You've got the CD with the book. It gives you a guide tempo or speed to play that you should be aiming to play to, but it's more importantly to aim for clarity in the evenness. Even if you're a little on the slow side, you can develop your speed later, but your clarity and your evenness of rhythm is the most important thing. I suppose just before I move on, I should just mention time signatures. If you look at the beginning of your rhythm studies, you're going to see 4/4 and 3/4. I'm not going to go into that too much right now because that's a lesson in itself, but 4/4 time in real simple terms means you're going to play 4 beats per bar. So if you see a song that says 4/4 at the beginning and then you see a chord in its own section or bar, then you're playing G for the equivalent of 4 beats. In the rhythm study 1, you're actually strumming 4 times, okay? So you're strumming on every beat. Rhythm study 1, rhythm study 3 are both in 4/4 time. Rhythm study 2 is in 3/4 time, which would sound like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Not 4/4 time, which sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And then you've got your melodies to play. So you've got 4 melodies. It's up to you which 2 you play. It's absolutely your choice. Technically speaking, you're supposed to play at least 1 melody from the book, and if you want, you can play another melody of an equivalent standard, providing it's a popular tune. I think, don't quote me, but if you read the book, it says something like, as long as it's anything from about 1960 onwards, it might be even earlier, but we're talking really essentially fairly modern-ish popular music on the broad sense, you know, of any kind of style, but as long as it's fairly known, and that you have a printout of the music, you could also take that as your second melody. I'd honestly advise at this stage, stick to 2 from the book. It just simplifies things and it gives you less to think about, less to worry about, but that's an option if you want. So for example, you've just got to play the melodies evenly and smoothly. At preliminary grade, you probably won't play along with the examiner. They probably won't back you up. I always get my students to have the ability to play along, where I play the backing, they can play the melody along with me. More than likely in the exam you'll play free time, which kind of makes it a little bit easier for you, but if you aim for being able to play absolutely pretty much as the track goes on the CD, you're going to know that you're in the right ballpark. So, I mean, I'm not going to play the whole melody. For example, Aurally is one of the melodies. It's more famously known as Love Me Tender, because that was the big hit for Elvis Presley. He used the melody to Aurally, which is an old American folk song about a woman called Aurally. But the melody, so Aurally, Love Me Tender, same melody, and essentially that, it then repeats, and then you get the next section. And then the whole piece repeats. Now, a couple of things. Look at the beginning of the melody, and at the end of the melody you're going to see two dots at the beginning of the music in the standard notation and in the tablature, and they just mean repeat. All the melodies at preliminary level are just full on play the whole piece of music and then repeat the whole piece of music. Repeat dots can occur at different points in a song, and so you would repeat this bit and then maybe carry on and so on and so on, but at preliminary level they're all full song, so watch out for that. You're expected to know that when you get to the end of the piece you should then play it again, so you shouldn't need to be prompted when you come to do your exam to play again, you just would play it again. Really final important thing I'm just going to mention before I mention something about the Aural assessment towards the end, is which fingers you use, and this goes throughout the whole grade. You basically, when you're learning, it's a good idea to try and learn to this kind of one finger per fret idea. So if you're playing a piece of music, and like Aurally, that uses fret positions of 0, so there's open strings, it uses fret 1, fret 2, fret 3, and that's as far as we get at this level, at this grade in fact. I would recommend strongly, for the most part, use the same finger as the fret. So if it's fret 1, use finger 1, if it's fret 2, use finger 2, and if it's fret 3, use finger 3, regardless of which string you're on, okay? You don't count your thumb as a finger in guitar. Well, you may not count it as a finger in real life, it's your thumb. Okay, I'm stating the obvious. Finger 1, finger 2, finger 3, index fingers, finger 1. It won't make the music sound any better to use those specific fingers, but and also initially you may find it more tricky to use those specific fingers. You may find it easier to just move around with one finger. You may find that sometimes your second finger feels stronger. Well, I would strongly, and to cut a long story short, there's some fantastic players throughout history who've played with all sorts of different fingerings, okay? And basically, it stands to reason. If somebody's good, they're good, regardless of which fingers they use. You watch people like Brian May. He doesn't, from Queen, the Queen guitarist. He doesn't particularly use his little finger that much. By his own admission, he says he's got a bad technique. I'm not saying he's got bad technique, but he sort of recognises probably some of the elements that I'm referring to. He maybe doesn't stick to, but he's a great guitar player. Fine. Django Reinhardt, one of the most famous gypsy jazz guitarists ever, fantastic guitarist. You know, his famous story that his hand was damaged in the fire, and his second, his little finger and his third finger were kind of disabled to a point. And when he played most of his melodies, he would play with two fingers. Claim to be able to play like Django by any means, but the point is you can do it. He took it to a fantastic level, very technically able. I would just but having said that, I would say that if you're a beginner, I would try and stick to the more disciplined, advised fingerings of one finger per fret. It's like, same with your scales. Don't try not to play just with one finger, because although you're not going to get necessarily a different tone or a different overall sound from using those fingers, you're trying to develop the skill yourself, get your fingers dexterous, get them able to all become strong fingers, and later on, as you learn more complex pieces, this can be really, really advantageous. I myself will play in this, with this system, but sometimes I'll still swap to other fingerings because the piece I'm playing may require it. You know, you may do a bend or a certain technique where one finger's stronger than the other, but it's a really, really good idea to train your fingers up now at this point. Okay, so that's essentially everything covered, I think. The only other thing is you've got the Aural assessment at the end. That's a little bit boring, I think, really, to go into it too much now. All I'll say is you basically have to be able to recognise the difference between high and low notes. That would be a pitch test, okay? So you'd be looking at, somebody would be, while you look away, you either close your eyes or turn away. Essentially, the examiner will play a note, and then they'll play another note, and you have to say which you think is the highest in pitch. So, for example, this note is higher in pitch than this note. So your answer would be first. If you heard these two notes, your answer again would be first, because you're trying to identify which was the highest note. If you heard these two notes, your answer would be second, because the second note was higher in pitch. Okay. You also have the harmony section, which is essentially recognizing the difference between the sounds of chords. Harmony is really a way of describing the effect when you get different notes playing together, and they create more, instead of just a note, you know, you get a harmonization, you get the harmony of different notes playing together. And essentially at this grade, that's referring to your chords. You've got major chords, you've got minor chords. So the examiner would get you to look away. You would then listen to some chords that he or she would play, and you would try and recognize whether they were major or minor. Okay. So, in a nutshell, major chords are best thought of as happy chords. Okay. And minor chords are best thought of as sad chords. When you're making when you're trying to compare a musical concept to an emotion, obviously everybody will have a different opinion of how some things sound, but it's sometimes handy to refer to what people generally agree on. Most people would assume that major sounds happy. I'll just play some major chords. Okay, now I'll play the minor version, and I hope you'll hear that this sounds slightly more sad or melancholy. Okay, so if you hear the sad chords, your answer should probably should be minor. If you hear the chords and you think they sound happy, then you're thinking major. It's a very sort of not dubious. It's a very kind of ambiguous area, because major chords could be played in such a way that they sound sad. You know, you could have a sad song that contains major chords. You could imagine some sad lyrics over that, and you're getting, you know, a song about somebody dying or whatever, your cat passes away. But essentially, still, if you compare them to the minor version, the minor chords are even more sad. So there we are again, playing sad, happy chords, major chords in a maybe not so excitingly happy way. And here's the minor version. Okay, in time your ear will develop, you'll begin to recognise these quite easily. If right now you can't hear what I'm on about, you can't hear the difference, or you find it's tricky to recognise the difference between major and minor, don't worry, that's really normal. Your ear will develop. When I say your ear will develop, your ability to listen and recognise things will develop as you play. the more you play stuff, the more you get used to hearing it, and you're always training your brain to listen. So play your chords, play everything in your book, play any other songs you can learn as well. And as you do so, listen to the chords. Make sure you know which chords you're playing. You know, some people, the reason I say that is some people will learn a chord sequence, for example, and then forget the names of the chords they're playing. So they just learn by physical sort of memory, muscle memory, whatever. They don't necessarily remember the names, and that's fine as well. To a point, it's all good, but it gives you the control to know what you're doing and where you're going and what you're on about if you know what the chords are called. So make sure you do know what the chords are called, and just listen to the character of those chords. Minor chords, major chords, they're the two polar opposites in music. Just like, you know, emotions, you've got happy, you've got sad, and then you've generally got something that's a variation of one of those. And your chords are kind of similar. You've got happy chords, sad chords, and you've got chords that feel like some sort of version of those. So play everything in your book, listen to those rhythm studies, and in time your ear will start to recognise the difference. Okay, so that's essentially it. Oh, the final thing is you've got some rhythm tests. That's really where the examiner will play a phrase, for example, like a melody, like and then they'll play it again, and you'll be expected to clap along the main beat. So if you get this, you wouldn't clap if you were clapping the main beat. You would clap. So if I just tap my foot to give that, that would be like. Okay, so you're clapping the pulse. Imagine there's a drummer playing and you're kind of clapping that main beat. There is a section where they'll play a melody and ask you to clap the exact rhythm of the phrase that was played. So if it, in that case, if they went, you would then go. That's kind of it. The final thing is within the rhythm assessment section, about where you're trying to clap the beat, you would also have to then say whether you thought that piece of music was playing in 4/4 time or 3/4 time, which is essentially saying, do you think that rhythm da, 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 feels like it's playing da, 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 or do you think it feels like it's playing to threes, da, 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 and so on and so on. Again, that's something that it's going to be far too long for me to go through now, but that's essentially what you've got to do. I think that covers everything. So memorize your scales, memorize your chords, attempt to learn to play them neatly and evenly and with clarity. Learn as many rhythm studies as you can, but at least prepare one of them for exam standard. I would also advise with your melodies, learn all 4 from the book, but you need to prepare and be able to play well 2 of them. And I think that's everything covered. So there we go. That's preliminary level acoustic RGT covered. Okay, thanks for watching.